When you think about the Enlightenment, that pivotal era of reason and progress, it often feels like it sprang entirely from European soil, right? Like a kind of self-contained intellectual revolution. But what if the very foundations of our modern world, the ideas we hold dear, were actually deeply shaped by a much wider or maybe unexpected global conversation?
That is precisely what we're going to unpack today. Our deep dive is into, well, a really illuminating study that challenges that common historical narrative head on.
Okay.
It's Dr. Zulfiqar Ali Shah's powerful book, Islam and the English Enlightenment.
Right. And our mission here is pretty exciting, I think, to reveal how Islamic ideas, science, and culture actually played a central, yet often overlooked role.
Yeah, a really central role.
In shaping the values and thought of figures you definitely know, like John Locke and Isaac Newton, and just the broader landscape of 17th and 18th century England. You're going to discover some truly surprising connections. And, well, as the source suggests, you might just find yourself thanking Muslims for aspects of the English Enlightenment as we understand it. So let's dig in.
Okay. So historically, Western scholarship has often presented what's known as a Whiggish, Eurocentric view of history.
Right, the straight line.
Yeah, think of it as that linear timeline. Ancient Greece led to Rome, which then led to Christian Europe, the Renaissance, and boom, the Enlightenment.
And people like Newton and Locke are just sort of there, developing ideas on their own.
Pretty much. They're often portrayed as developing their groundbreaking ideas almost in a cultural vacuum, purely from within these European traditions.
And it sounds like this narrative isn't just an accident, is it? The source describes it as a way to position the West as the sole mother of all civilizations.
That's the critique, yes.
Yeah.
And take Max Weber, the famous sociologist. He really emphasized Protestant, specifically Calvinist and Puritan, beliefs as the crucial foundation for modern capitalism, democracy, modernity in Europe.
But Dr. Shah's work directly confronts these, what he calls uninformed and Eurocentric accusations.
He argues that this traditional narrative consciously downplays, or even, his word, obliterates significant Islamic contributions.
Obliterates, wow.
Yeah, it's not just presented as an oversight. The book calls it nothing short of a theft of history.
A theft of history, okay.
Where the past is conceptualized and presented based solely on Europe's kind of provincial scale, ignoring these massive global developments happening elsewhere.
So the source really doesn't hold back on this Weberian view, describing it with some, well, pretty strong words. Simplistic, dubious, sketchy, arbitrary, fictitious, fanciful, and Whiggish.
Exactly. And what's fascinating here is the counter-argument it presents. During what's often called the Dark Ages, up to pre-modern times, Christendom was frequently marked by, irrationalism, internal wars, religious intolerance, persecutions, trade restrictions, absolutism, and superstitions.
A very different picture.
A very different picture. And in sharp contrast, the source shows how the Muslim world during that same period was promoting things like relative religious freedom, a republican ethos, free trade, limited monarchy, and rational discourse.
Plus, the book makes the point that capitalism and science didn't always flourish in Calvinist areas, right?
Yeah.
Which challenges Weber's idea.
Precisely. It further challenges that singular focus.
Okay, that really sets the stage. Let's talk about some concrete Islamic contributions then. The source highlights what's known as the 12th century Renaissance.
Yes, this is crucial. This period, starting around 1100, was significantly spurred by the translation of just countless philosophical and scientific Arabic manuscripts into Latin.
Countless, so like a flood of information.
A flood is a good way to put it. The Harvard historian Charles Homer Haskins noted that around 1100 European libraries were, well, pretty sparse. Mostly the Bible and a few Latin fathers.
Right.
But then in the 12th century, there was this immense influx of new learning from the East Arabic sources coming from Spain, Sicily, Syria, North Africa, even Constantinople.
And the source says this was just as vital as the later Italian Renaissance's use of Greek sources.
Just as vital, but with a key difference. Its primary focus was more on philosophy and science.
That is a huge distinction. So early Muslims weren't just like keepers of old Greek knowledge that the West had lost.
Oh, much more than keepers. They were inheritors, yes. But they also absorbed and synthesized knowledge from Egyptian, Persian, Chinese, and Indian traditions.
So it was a melting pot of knowledge.
Exactly, creating this vibrant Islamic synthesis that was consistent with their faith principles. They were building on it, innovating. Think algebra, medicine, optics, astronomy. These saw major advancements.
And this wasn't just scholars locked away, right? You mentioned Venice.
Right. Venice, a major European power. It was literally surrounded by and deeply connected through trade with the huge Ottoman and Mamluk empires.
Its whole economy depended on it.
Absolutely. Its prosperity relied on this trade. Venetian merchants had access from China all the way to North Africa, goods, ideas, everything.
And you can actually see this.
You can. In the art, the Bellini family's Renaissance paintings, like St. Mark preaching at Alexandria, they vividly show this fascination with Islamic culture.
What do they show?
You see Islamic symbols, architecture, minarets, domes, diverse Eastern peoples. It shows a European Renaissance defining itself through exchange, not just in isolation.
Okay, that's fascinating. But maybe even more surprising is the argument about the English Revolution and science being tied to trade with the Muslim world.
Yes, the socioeconomic roots. These early overseas trading companies like the Levant Company, the East India Company, they weren't just about importing goods.
What else were they doing?
They actually recognized a critical need for scientific expertise.
Really? What?
Well, think about it. They needed mathematicians, astronomers, medics for navigation on long voyages, for logistics, for keeping crews healthy. It was practical.
So they actively hired these experts.
They supported and employed them, yes. And here's where it gets really interesting. Eminent Royal Society fellows, including giants like Robert Boyle and Isaac Newton himself, they were direct investors or major shareholders in these very companies.
Wow. So their scientific work and their money were linked to this trade.
Their prestige and their financial interests were directly intertwined with these ventures. It wasn't just abstract research detached from the world.
That completely changes how you think about the drivers of the scientific revolution. And what about the people actually on the ships, the merchants?
Great point. English merchants, sailors, company officials, often leaving Europe quite young, they learned and expanded their knowledge directly from their Muslim, Hindu, and Eastern Christian teachers, facilitators, and interlocutors overseas.
So learning on the job, basically, from local experts.
Exactly. The source really emphasizes that knowledge of nature moved not just geographically, but also epistemically.
Epistemically, meaning?
Meaning the actual systems of knowledge, the ways of knowing from different cultures intersected and influenced each other. It wasn't a one-way street of Europeans bringing knowledge outwards. Far from it.
Okay, so it's clear this was much more than just trading spices and silk. It was a deep, interconnected web of learning. And it wasn't just science being exchanged, was it? How did these powerful new ideas start affecting England's religion and politics?
Well, the source offers a pretty stark critique of traditional Roman Christianity of that era. It describes it as a supernatural, top-down, hierarchical, absolutist, paradoxical, and mysterious.
That sounds quite rigid.
Very. Emphasizing concepts like grace-based salvation, original sin, the Trinity. And often, the source argues this came at the expense of man, nature, society, and terrestrial realms. It suppressed focus on human potential or life here on Earth.
And led to authoritarianism.
The book argues it fostered an authoritarian, often persecutory society where intellectual inquiry could be stamped out by religious doctrine. Figures like Augustine and Justinian are cited for initiating religious coercion and persecution.
Okay, but then we get the Islamic theological counterpoint, which sounds radically different based on the source.
Radically different. Islam, as presented here, rejects concepts like original sin, the idea of a depraved human nature, the triune conception of God, the Trinity, the divinity of Jesus, and predetermined selective salvific schemes.
So what did it emphasize instead?
It's described as ushering in an era focused on human individual freedom, moral agency, initiatives and capacities, mental and rational clarity, and human participation.
More focus on the individual.
Yes. It humanized Jesus, making him a moral role model and an exalted human being, which, the source argues, restored human self-esteem and empowered humanity in a new way.
And these theological differences had real political ripples back in England.
Absolutely. Think about the regicide of Charles III executing the king. That event blew the doors open for concepts like limited monarchy and popular sovereignty.
Things we now take for granted, maybe?
Exactly. And what served as an initial model for these radical ideas in England, the source points to the Islamic republicanism of the Ottoman Empire.
Republicanism in the Ottoman Empire.
Well, in the sense that the Sultan's executive powers were actually limited by Sharia law. It wasn't absolute divine right in the same way. And there was a notable absence of forced religious conversion or coercion compared to parts of Europe.
But this wasn't just an abstract idea people read about. There were connections.
Whoa, very practical connections. There was a strategic Protestant-Islamic affinity, particularly around tolerance and shared enemies.
Like who?
Like the Catholic Habsburgs, English monarchs like Queen Elizabeth I and King James. I actually aligned with Ottoman anti-Catholic sentiments, for instance. They both rejected icons and idolatry. It was partly geopolitics.
That shared ground seems to have created space for some really radical thinkers in England.
It did. Early proponents of tolerance, like Thomas Helwys and Roger Williams, these weren't just talking about tolerating different kinds of Protestants.
Who else did they include?
They explicitly argued for religious toleration for all peaceable religions, including, and they said this, Turks, Jews.
Wow. That's incredibly broad for the time.
It was revolutionary. They directly challenged enforced religious uniformity, linking it to civil war and hypocrisy. And the source points out that this principle, which Locke later championed, was remarkably in line with the Islamic teachings of no coercion in matters of religion.
Which brings us to Locke. How deeply was he influenced?
Well, John Locke was a close friend of John Tillotson, who was a Unitarian. Locke himself became this powerful advocate for religious tolerance and a complete separation between the church and state.
The famous separation.
The famous separation. He stated flatly that care of souls cannot belong to the civil ruler, arguing true religion needs inward conviction, not force.
And the Ottoman connection.
He explicitly, repeatedly quoted the example of the Ottoman Empire's tolerance towards followers of other faiths. It wasn't just theory, he used it as a real-world example.
And his own beliefs leaned Unitarian.
The source notes his Unitarian tendencies, yeah. He gravitated towards denying the Trinity, seeing Christ in terms of a moral, spiritual, derivative, and secondary exaltation, aligning with Socinian and Unitarian ideas.
So Locke's ideas weren't just out of nowhere. They were resonating with existing models and currents. And then there's Newton. His views were even stronger.
Even more emphatic, according to the source. Newton's Unitarian monotheism and anti-Trinitarianism were more emphatic than even Locke and Milton. He apparently believed the Trinity was a diabolical fraud.
Strong words from Newton.
Very. He felt all of modern Christianity was tainted by its presence. He actually dug deep into research on prophecy and church history, trying to recover what he saw as a pristine Unitarian Christianity corrupted back in the 4th century.
Okay, but here's the part that really jumps out. Newton and Muhammad.
Yeah, this is quite something. According to this research, Isaac Newton, the icon of Western rationalism, didn't just study Christian history. He believed that Prophet Muhammad was a genuine prophet sent to the Arabs.
Wait, Isaac Newton believed Muhammad was a genuine prophet.
That's what the source states. And more than that, he used Near Eastern texts, specifically a dream interpretation book by someone called Ahmed the Arabian, as an authoritative guide for interpreting the Bible.
A dream interpretation book. To understand the Bible.
He saw it as reflecting authentic Prisca Sapientia, ancient wisdom. This shatters the neat boxes we put these figures into, doesn't it? It shows this incredible, interwoven, global, intellectual world.
Yeah, that's huge. And Newton wasn't alone in these anti-Trinitarian ideas.
No, the source also points to Michael Servetus, calling him the founding father of modern anti-Trinitarianism.
Servetus.
He denied Jesus' divinity, original sin, redemptive death, saw Jesus more as a human prophet to emulate. His ideas spread through Holland, Britain, America, playing a really decisive role in liberal thought.
And there were others, like John Beale.
Right, John Beale, an Anglican chaplain, described as a closet Islamophile and radical Unitarian. He apparently believed Islam was morally and theologically superior to modern confessionalized Christianity.
Superior.
Saw it as the true heir to pristine original Christianity of Jesus. He even apparently wished that we had either more or less of Mohammedanism, provocative stuff.
These weren't just quiet academic thoughts, though, were they? How did these ideas spread?
That brings us to a fascinating social hub, the London coffee houses.
Ah, the penny universities.
Exactly. They became these vital public spaces for intellectual exchange, much more egalitarian than, say, universities or the court.
Anyone could go.
places where men of every status could gather, drink coffee, which was itself a Turkish import, and discuss everything, even risky topics like heresy, irreligion, and sedition.
And Islamic ideas were part of the buzz.
Absolutely. Turkish fashion was popular, the coffee itself was Turkish, and these coffee houses were instrumental in spreading anti-monarchy, anti-Anglican church ideas. Discussions of Islamic republicanism and Unitarianism happened there, filtering these influences into everyday conversation.
So ultimately, the Enlightenment wasn't just a scientific revolution, but maybe also a theological one.
You could definitely see it that way. A profound theological and global rupture. This Unitarian ethico-rational monotheism, this focus on a single, rational, ethical God moving away from the complex mysteries of the Trinity. It really helped break Europe free from some of those rigid, absolutist religious structures.
Paving the way for pluralism.
For religious pluralism and diversity, yes. The source argues this theological shift was genuinely as significant as the scientific revolution.
And it changed the view of humanity's place, too. You mentioned transcendental anthropomorphism.
Right. It's the idea that God and faith were sort of leveraged to enhance human freedom, human participation, human happiness here on Earth. A shift away from seeing humanity as totally dependent on a wrathful, distant God needing appeasement. It empowered the human element.
Interesting. And early deism was linked to this.
Yes. Early deism and natural religion, thinkers like Charles Blount, Thomas Hobbes, their ideas were closely identified with the Mohammedan Christianity of Stubb and John Toland.
Mohammedan Christianity.
It highlights this conscious appropriation process, the source argues. European reformers taking ready-made Islamic ideals, whether openly, like the radicals, or maybe more subtly, like Locke and Newton seem to do.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it becomes incredibly clear, doesn't it? The English Enlightenment, so often painted as this purely European moment.
Yeah, it was really this complex tapestry woven with threads from all over the globe and significantly enriched by Islamic thought, science, cultural practices. It's undeniable.
From buildings to belief?
From architecture to deep theology, yeah. From the economic engines driving science, remember Newton investing in those trading companies, to the very first ideas bubbling up about religious tolerance and limited government. The influence was profound.
And this isn't just about assigning credit points on a historical scoreboard.
No, not at all. It's about truly understanding how knowledge and progress actually move through these interconnected global networks. It just defies those simplistic, walled-off narratives we sometimes get.
This deep dive really makes you reconsider how historical narratives get built, doesn't it? Sometimes shaped, maybe unconsciously, by later agendas.
Absolutely.
It leads us to wonder, maybe as a final thought, what other historical narratives, the ones usually presented as these solitary inventions, might reveal similar hidden threads of cross-cultural influence? If we just, look a little closer, what else might we discover if we broaden our lens?